Fellowship for Intentional Community in its current incarnation got started in 1987. I was there at the beginning of that. There was a forerunner organization called the Fellowship of Intentional Communities, plural, that it started in the late 1940s. The roots of it were World War II conscientious objectors. It would tend to be religious-based objections, pacifists, and they were part of a number of communities based in the Ohio Valley and the Mid-Atlantic states, and they got together to talk about what could be done to eliminate the occasion for war as a solution to international problems. They objected to war. They went to jail over it in World War II. They were out of jail now in the late 40s and wanted to talk about that. I don't know that they got anywhere particular in a program at that time. However, it became an opportunity for fellowship to talk about what their experiences were in their communities. And then over time, it tended to die out. And I think in the late 60s or so, the only remnant of that organization was a loan fund that had been capitalized by a donation by someone to be a revolving loan fund for community businesses. And the administration of that loan fund was the one remaining project of the forerunner organization. Then somebody had the idea to use some of that money from the loan fund as a grant to try to revitalize the idea of having a network organization that could do many more things. This was then a completely new cast of characters. While some of the people from the original organization still were around, they weren't actively involved in community networking anymore, and none of them were present at this revitalizing meeting that took place in 1987. And that group then changed the name from the FIC that was Fellowship of Intentional Communities to Fellowship for Intentional Community, expressly opening the door for those that supported what intentional community stood for, however didn't live in those communities. And it's been, a majority of our membership has always been people who like the model but don't live in it. So that's been an important distinction for us, to be open to not just people doing it. The program of the original group was basically, it was people who had been involved in outreach and networking regionally or in a piecemeal way all around the country and could see the possibilities of a national umbrella organization. That was our dream. And our intent always from the beginning was to not promote any particular kind of intentional community. It was intended to promote cooperation and to make available information about who was doing what of all kinds. There were only three caveats that we had to participate in FIC. One was that you didn't advocate violent practices. Very few communities say they do that. However, some are accused of it, and so that becomes an important thing to discuss and examine if it comes into play. And that would be number one. Number two is you didn't interfere with individuals' rights to leave a community or disassociate freely if it was no longer fitting for them. You could have criteria for how somebody joined, but if somebody wanted out, that it was okay. Again, this isn't something that people say they do. However, there were concerns about the possibility of what might be called cult behavior, and whether that's brainwashing or manipulating people or putting up obstacles in some way, whether it's physical, economic, or psychological, that would make it awkward for someone to leave the group. And then the third piece was that you be accurate and honest about how you portrayed yourself, so that you didn't say one thing and do another. So if we were providing listing information about a group and there was somebody saying, whoa, it's not that way, then the group was answerable to explaining what the gap was about and correcting it if there was a mistake, or satisfying the complaint. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding and we have to navigate that. So that gave us a basis for conversation if there were complaints. In that context then, as long as consenting adults are upfront about what they're doing, it's a matter of people sorting themselves on according to what's out there and not us telling them what to do. We never intended, nor have we ever acted as a good housekeeping seal of approval, saying these communities are okay and these are bad. We just say this is what's out there, and sort it out for yourself. Go and visit them, find out if it's a good fit for you, and make your own decisions. We don't tell communities how to operate, and they if they want to participate, then they let us know. We also don't list any community that doesn't give us express permission to do it. So at any given time, we may have a sense of 3 times as many communities out there as we list in our book and online, because we never publish information unless the community tells us they're okay with it being published. There's a variety of reasons why those 2/3 decline. Just to give you a hint of what that means, in part it can be disorganization. There's a lot of groups that have an identity as a community, but they don't have any person or even a cohesion sufficient to commit to responding to inquiries, and we don't want to invite a lot of people to look at things that then they don't get any answers about. So if they aren't willing to make that commitment, we don't list them. Sometimes they are discouraged and in disarray, and so it's questionable whether they'll continue. Sometimes they're in disarray because they're just getting started and don't want the responsibility of handling inquiries from strangers because they're still trying to digest the dynamics they've got with the people that have already been identified. Sometimes their mission or purpose in life is exotic enough that they're afraid that attention from strangers will be more problematic or critical than it will be positive. I don't mean necessarily illegal activities, just ones that are unpopular, and so they want to keep a low profile. Sometimes communities consider themselves full and they prefer to grow very organically and slowly from the network of people they already know and don't want to be bothered by strangers. And they don't have a mission to necessarily witness or make themselves available to strangers to see what they're doing. So for all those reasons, a lot of groups decline to be listed. So the primary mission at the outset for the fellowship was to gather that information and make it available. The first project we undertook was the creation of the Communities Directory. First one we did came out in late 1990. We've now produced 5, and we're this summer in the process of producing our 6th book. We've also, 2 years later, that would have been 1992, we became the publishers of Communities Magazine. So we've been publisher now since that time. Our first issue came out in 94, so for the last 15 years it's been a very reliable quarterly again. So that's another major way in which we get information out. When the web came available, we got involved as early as 1994. We got our web domain. We got in early enough that we have a 2-letter domain name, which is like, those are long gone now, ic.org. And that's become, from a novelty 15 years ago, it is now far and away the #1 way in which we transmit information and people find us. So we have the directory information available online, and many of our other resources are available there. The other main program activity that the fellowship does is events. We're sitting here in one of the rooms at Rose Hall at Kimberton Hills, which is a Camp Hill community 30 miles west of Philadelphia. We have our organizational meetings twice a year. We move around the country where they're located, and frequently, maybe about half the time or a third of the time, we will try to do an event in conjunction with our organizational meetings, taking advantage of all of our staff being together who are experts about community to do workshops and presentations which the general public is interested in. So we had a one-day event here at Kimberton in this hall, and people come to get information and the inspiration of community at these events. So that's a live way that we distribute information, not just through the web and through our publications, and give people a taste as well as the information of community. We see ourselves as brokers for information about community of all kinds. It used to be focused strictly on intentional community. However, 5 years ago, the board made the explicit decision to expand our mission beyond that to providing the tools for creating community where you are, using what we're learning in the intensity of intentional community and making it available to people in neighborhoods, in workplace, in church groups, or in other nonprofits who want more sense of community but may never seriously consider owning property jointly with somebody else and forming an intentional community. The hunger for more connection, neighborliness, security in one's life that was characteristic of old-style communities is very prevalent in today's culture. A lot of people feel there's been a degradation of community, of connection, of safety, and they would like to go back to what was characteristic of earlier times. However, when they say they want that, they don't want to go back to the social hierarchy of those times, or the patriarchy, the caste systems that existed in the times where that community was strong. They want it on a more egalitarian basis where everyone's got a say and there's freedom to choose what aspects you're connected with. And so we're trying to figure out how to get the good parts of what came from the past and put it into a new social context.